Merry Christmas, one and all. From Mario to Zelda to Monkey Ball. Last 2 years, I ended my Christmas marathon by talking about a fan game that I created myself. Those being MarioGame.exe, but of course, and Robotnik's Mighty Pingus, my magnum opus. This is my masterpiece, or at least it will be if I ever decide to actually finish it. This year, I sadly do not have a fan game of my own. At least not one that I am currently prepared to show off or discuss at length. So I decided that this Christmas, I'm gonna do something a little different. I'm gonna do a brief look back at 3 Mario 64 ROM hacks from the old days that I have a lot of nostalgia for, and continue to have a lot of historical significance. These are ROM hacks that everybody who is in the know will remember, and they are also games that I have spoken about over millennia ago. The reason I'm doing this is twofold. On the one hand, Christmas time always gets me nostalgic and sentimental. But the other reason is because I've long wanted to revisit some of these games with my more refined perspective. With respect to Super Mario 64 ROM hacks specifically, there are a lot of things that are kind of taken for granted today because the scope of the hacking scene has expanded at an alarming rate. But the games I'm talking about today are from an era where it couldn't always be taken for granted. They're a throwback to a very exciting and fascinating time. And in the same way that ROM hacks have evolved greatly since then, I think I've gotten a little better at discussing them. I don't want to brag or sound arrogant or anything like that, but keep in mind, I used to use the Rock Band microphone for my voiceover. I used to stretch all the footage out to 16:9. I used to use Windows Movie Maker, oh my god. But in seriousness, another issue I had back then was the way I would talk about these things. I was often too hard on ROM hacks. I would complain excessively about bugs and glitches and whatnot, basically holding the games to the standard of an official game made by a team of industry veterans, which really wasn't fair. Back then, I was ignorant of the context in which those ROM hacks were made, and did not afford them the consideration that I should have given the circumstances of their development. So I've long wanted to take another look at some of them, and who knows, maybe in the future I'll revisit even more. But what better time to start than on this most holy of days? Merry Christmas, Happy Holidays, Happy New Year, might as well get a jump on that too, and let's go! First we gotta go way back to the first ROM hack I ever played in my life, Super Mario 74 by Lug Millard. This was originally released in June of 2011, that's 12 years ago. When I first saw this game, it was in a Let's Play series by a dude named Blue Blazing Demon, who I was subscribed to at the time because he was the only one who had a full Let's Play of Earthworm Jim 3D. I wasn't even making videos back then, it really was the dark ages. I saw him upload videos with the words Super Mario 74 in the title, and at first I thought, this is a trick, this isn't real. But sure enough, it was. I had next to no concept of ROM hacks back then whatsoever. I mean, I might have heard of Kaizo mods or things that change the text to make Koopa the Quick say something racist or whatever, but that's about it. So imagine my shock and wonder when I saw Super Mario from Mario 64 running around in these brand new levels that never existed in the original game. All these new worlds, new levels, overworlds, challenges, dialogue. I could not believe this was even possible. This is over 10 years old, so it makes sense that the levels aren't a super graphical showcase with a lot of complex interactive set pieces like today, but at the time, I thought it was magical. I used to imagine what it would be like to stumble upon top secret levels in Super Mario 64 that I had never seen before after 100%ing the game 1,000 times. This was like that, except it was actually real. The game's very existence was just mind-blowing to me, so even if the game turned out to be bad, I would still be overwhelmed. Just to be clear though, the game is good. It's real good. Albeit a little bit daunting for a regular Mario 64 player. Back when I first played Mario 74, the thing that really flew out of left field for me was the difficulty. Like I said before, I didn't know anything about ROM hacks, but I also didn't have the context of speedrun strats either, or even just halfway competent Mario 64 gameplay like angled wall jumps and whatnot. Imagine that, the first ROM hack I'd ever played and it expects me to do this. But at the time, it was refreshing because the original game was very easy, especially for the master that I somehow believed I was at the time. It is worth noting that the version I'm playing has been heavily revised by several contributors over the years, doing things like removing fall damage, the live system, and adding a neat detail where Mario becomes a shadow when he goes behind a wall, like in the newer 3D Mario titles, as well as brushing up on some collision and camera issues. There was also this level, which I'm pretty sure originally had exactly 100 coins in it, but they added a couple more just to have pity on you. They also might have lowered some of the star door counts, but I may just be remembering that wrong. These little flourishes do make the game a bit less frustrating than I remember, but at the end of the day, the fundamental skill set required to beat the game is still largely unchanged, at least 95% of the time. But aside from the difficulty, the other thing I noticed was the size and scope. For the first ROMhack I remember playing, the scope of the game was tremendous. This was definitely a Royale with cheese style ROMhack with 150 stars to collect, making it bigger than the base game. I'm pretty sure this game was all I played for a straight month back then, always hogging the family computer and abusing save states like mad, just so I could get past whatever platforming, wall-jumping, quicksandy hellscape was pissing me off at the time. Back then, it didn't matter that the game was kicking my ass, just the fact that I was playing Super Mario 64 with all new levels was like magic. It was like seeing Aurora Borealis or falling in love. And I know that sounds super dramatic, but I was a teenager, alright? This was also when I learned just how malleable the Mario 64 sound font was. Hearing songs from other games done in the Mario 64 sound font, it was another thing that's taken for granted today that was mind-blowing to me back then. Hearing the flipside music from Super Paper Mario redone in Mario 64 is something that I will never forget. Every time I hear it, it just takes me right back to that simpler, more innocent time where I had never heard the words half A press in my life. As challenging as the game is, I actually had a much easier time with it this time than I remember, probably because I know how to silly kick now. But the final two courses of the game, that's a whole other ballpark. These were more epic than anything I could have predicted. The Luminium Sphere and the Ombru Sphere. These two different versions of the same demented fortress of wall jumps and precarious platforming, with the Stone Tower Temple music from Majora's Mask. The high difficulty of this area was frustrating, but also heightened the dramatic magnitude of it all. It truly felt like I was an intruder upon a holy place where I was not welcome. And at that point, I knew I had to play every single ROMhack that gets made. And that's how I met your mother. If you still somehow never played Mario 74, I'm telling you, flag this one for your backlog. It's not only a fun game with a lot of challenge with varying degrees of fairness, but it's also an extremely important game in the canon of Mario 64 ROM hacking. This right here, this is history. Speaking of history, later that same year, another very famous Mario 64 ROM hack dropped. It was called Super Mario Star Road by Skellux, and it was dope, just straight up. I mean, just look at it. What would you call that if not dope? Never could I have imagined after finishing Mario 74 that another heavy hitter like this would drop not even a year later. If you've never heard of this hack, I can only assume it's because you're a youngster. I believe that there is not a single solitary person who has been playing Mario 64 ROM hacks as long as me that doesn't know about Star Road. This is one of the most significant ROM hacks of its kind, and many people consider it to be good enough to bear the title of Super Mario 64 2. The first thing I remember noticing and loving about this ROM hack was the difficulty, which was more forgiving and balanced than Mario 74, most of the time. Star Road has challenging moments, but in general, the game is in the fair category, and my Mario 64 skills have gotten a lot better since then, so it's a lot easier to appreciate a good challenge. Okay, let me be clear. I did not say I was good. I just said I was better. The difficulty was one of my favorite things about Star Road, but even more than that was the visual attitude. There are a number of instances with new geometry and objects and textures that look much unlike anything in the base game, and that really impressed me when I first played it. This is another one of those things that is taken for granted today, but to have a level like this musical instrument dimension, which is very clearly inspired by Rayman, which is amazing, that was crazy. And with the exception of the non-Mario music, there's an element of authenticity to the level design that truly does make it feel like a sequel to Mario 64, or at least an official expansion of sorts. It was definitely familiar to the original, but with an undeniable element of brilliant surprise. Bowser's Super Nintendo Castle, but in 3D, that was so cool. I love how some levels even tell a story. In Fatal Flame Falls, there's this destroyed, decrepit castle with a painting of Bowser and his broken down clown car sitting in the corner. So, Bowser presumably used to live here, but then the castle was destroyed somehow. I wonder if it was an insurance scheme. You have the spaceport with all the spaceships, UFOs, and satellites, and the hands from the pyramid have been repurposed as deadly security bots. Then of course there's this place with all the toy blocks and cards and ice cream and cake all over the place. I call this the Porky dimension, because this is the kind of level Porky would make. Back then, I was so blown away by the tremendous variety in the locale, and even now, I can remember ROM hacks I played as recently as 3 years ago that don't have this level of variety or detail. The hub world is a brand new castle with all kinds of sub-areas like the foyer, the observatory, and the sewers. It felt like an actual fleshed out location, and I turned it upside down trying to find everything way back in the day. The music is wonderful. Almost every single song has been replaced by a new remix from some other game, not limited to Mario. Again, today, that's a given. But to me, back then, it was a big surprise. By the end of the game, you unlock a cannon in the observatory and literally launch yourself into the cosmos, where you walk above the heavens into space, and it starts playing this Mario Galaxy music. I know it's just a game, but when I saw that for the first time, that fucking ruled. Super Mario Star Road is a fan game, but it could be mistaken for an official game a lot of the time. It is truly something special, and even by modern ROM hack standards, it's definitely worth playing, and if you still somehow haven't played it, you should probably do it, because after a while, it's gonna start getting embarrassing. And finally, it's the ROM hack that blew my mind into the beyond realm and back. One that, at least I felt at the time, easily surpassed the original and made a massive impact. Yep, you heard me. It's Last Impact by Kaze in 2016, 7 years ago. By that time, I was big into Mario 64 ROM hacks. It had been 5 years since I played Mario 74, and the scene was really starting to pick up momentum. It was almost like I was playing whack-a-mole with Mario 64 mods. There were just so many, and it was daunting. In just a few years, they went from being this special kind of thing that popped up occasionally to being everywhere, and I couldn't be happier about it. And as I played more and more of them, I started paying more attention to the strengths and weaknesses and innovations of each game. But nothing could have prepared me for Last Impact. The release of this hack felt like an event, you know what I mean? This was back when Mario 64 ROM hacks were basically the main thing that I did on my channel. I must have had like 700 subscribers at the time, I don't even remember. But I would get comments like, "Hey Bino, when are you gonna review Last Impact?" Today, Kaze is kinda like the face of Mario 64 ROM hacking. On top of hosting F3, which was massively helpful for the marathon, he has dissected Mario 64 specifically to hell and back. He's got it running at 60 FPS on real N64 hardware, and added real-time lighting and inverse folded polynomial dick flips and whatever. Last Impact does not have that level of technical prestige, obviously. But when it came out, it was the most impressive hack that I had seen, at least speaking as someone who was more of a casual player at the time. There are a lot of elements of Last Impact that are taken for granted today, like the ridiculous abundance of new objects and power-ups. These things are a lot more common in modern ROM hacks, but back then, I don't think I had seen a Mario 64 hack with even just the sheer volume of completely original stuff. More than any ROM hack I remember before it, this was like a brand new video game, for better or worse. The reason I say that is because the game added so many new mechanics and enemies and power-ups and custom coding that it ended up being fundamentally very different from Mario 64 in many respects, which, if you're a Mario 64 purist, might not be the kind of thing you're looking for. So naturally, there are people who criticize the game for these reasons. I've gotten comments in the past that told me that I liked this game a little too much, and admittedly, I was pretty starstruck by it when it first came out. But my honeymoon period with the game is long over, so I can comfortably say this. If you're the kind of Mario 64 player who likes a challenge and is all about the pure platforming grunt, play 74 and Star Road. Last Impact is more about weirdo custom inventiveness and casual friendliness, and I thought that was great. It still makes it stand out, and I think there's room for both kinds of Mario 64 mods. It's definitely an experimental game for all the good and not as good that implies. I've played ROM hacks since then that I've probably enjoyed more, but I'm still very impressed by all the deep and heavy customization. The new enemies weren't just reskins of existing ones, they had new behaviors and programming. I had to learn the new strategies for defeating them in real time. No two levels feel the same either, they're all distinct and have a surprising amount of detail. Well, actually, I wasn't a fan of this cave level, but the beach? Ah, the beach. Snaky Jake Fortress. Ah, of course. There's the space station where you have to literally catch shooting stars out of the air. That was such a cool moment. Some levels have their own unique quirks and mechanics. The first level has these dandelion puffs that you ride on through the air. Puffballs get you
high, which I'm just now realizing is a reference to Yoshi's Island.
Look at this little monkey guy. He's so goofy. That's my favorite guy. There are also a lot of little things, like the updated HUD that hides itself when it's not needed, and the cutscenes at the beginning of every mission showing you vaguely what to do, like Mario Sunshine. Speaking of Sunshine, you can get Flood and hover around. Fire Flower, Cloud Flower, Frog Flower, Nintendo Power. Some of the things in this game were done in other hacks previously and definitely since, but to see them all come together in this big ass Royale with cheese style ROM hack back then was something else. Even though I'm not quite as fond of the game today, I can still remember how it would keep surprising me all the way up until the end. ROM hacks with this many new ideas and flourishes can be susceptible to breakage, and not every single thing works immaculately, but to be honest, I didn't actually notice way too many bugs or glitches. I'm sure other people have found more, but mostly my experience has been largely stable. And back then, I was, again, relieved by how easy it was. Some may criticize it for that, but considering the number of ROM hacks that take the other extreme, I think there is always room for a more light-hearted adventure like this. This might not still be my favorite ROM hack to this day, but I still feel that it's a very good one and a unique piece of work and definitely worth checking out if you haven't already, especially if you're interested in a more easygoing experience. This Christmas, I took you back to the past to play the funny games that kick ass. It's kinda wild to think that there was once a time where these games were the games that I looked forward to the most. I never really thought about it, but back then, I typically only checked out new video games when it was convenient, or when they showed up on the PlayStation Store for free with PS Plus. The exception was ROM hacks. I always loved firing up one of these games, and while it is incredible to see how far they've come, it's amazing how well they were already doing all those years ago. For the rest of the marathon, and even back to the summer marathon, I played a number of excellent Mario 64 ROM hacks, most of which were relatively recent, and I imagine many of them owe themselves, at least in some respect or another, to these older ones. We've come a long way since then, and going into the new year, I'm sure we'll go even further. And that concludes our 2023 Christmas Marathon. Merry Christmas and Happy New Year, and to all, a very good night, ho ho!